Lemaitre.
Oh yes, Lemaitre.
I mean, he should have been just condemned.
Yeah.
He has absolutely no business inventing fantasy ideas about how a Big Bang made everything, blah 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 blah. And it's not as though that, I mean, there is a wealth of information in the treasury of the church. Saint Basil the Great, who not only is a father of the church, he's also a doctor of the church, and he's regarded by many as being one of the greatest doctors of the church. He wrote a whole work on creationism. It's called the Hexameron, the 6 days.
Yeah.
It's amazing stuff. It really is. I mean, most people don't know it exists.
Am I right in saying Protestants, though they agree with us, they don't accept microevolution?
No, I think so.
Well, it's not even evolution, is it? It's variation.
Yeah. I just remember that
variation within a kind of
one of the SSPX priests saying that the Protestants, however, don't accept microevolution.
Oh, the SSPX don't know what they're talking about now. That book by that priest, Father Paul Robinson, accepts everything except macroevolution. He accepts everything on that list except macroevolution.
What's
the time scale, the Big Bang, all the rest of it, he accepts all of that. He says that Noah's flood was regional, which falsifies the words of our Lord in St. Matthew's Gospel. Our Lord teaches that the second coming, this is his comparison. Our Lord says the second coming of the Son of Man will be just like the flood in the days of Noah, and they'll be eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage right up until the last minute, and then bang, the flood waters came and they all perished. So also will be the second coming of the Son of Man. Well, will the second coming of our Lord be a regional affair then? It doesn't make any sense. Also, if it was a regional flood, why did God tell Noah to build an ark? Why didn't he just tell him to move? And when he gave the rainbow as the sign of his promise that he wouldn't do it again, there's been loads of regional floods since then. So God broke his promise. The only thing there's never been since then is a worldwide flood. There's so many problems with it, it makes no sense at all. And in the end, it means Genesis is not a reliable account, because as I said before, it makes a point of saying not only that the water covered the whole earth, it says the highest mountain was 30 cubits under the water. Now that's totally misleading and totally false. So if Genesis is not a reliable account, that means the Gospel of St. Matthew is not a reliable account, and it means what's the source of the magisterium, scripture and tradition? Well, you've now not got scripture. So why would tradition be reliable? What's equation? You have no more Catholic Church, you have no more Catholic teaching, and you have no more certainty about it. Really, that's where that leads you. That human beings aren't always logical, so there are some people who accept the premise, but they won't go to the conclusion, and they'll try and have it both ways. That is where that leads. That's where that leads in the end. And the fact is, if you went back to, let's say, the year 1800 and asked any Catholic, every single Catholic in any country in the world, rich or poor, high or low, priest or layman, Mexican peasant, Spanish nobility, they'd all tell you, yeah, Genesis is a reliable account. It was 6 actual days. And the argument today, it's reliable for theology, but it's not reliable for history, it's not reliable for science. These categories, that's theology, that's history, that's science, like a timetable in school. They're completely man-made. God doesn't have categories. Everything's one with him. He's the author of the laws of physics. He's also the author of history. So who gets to say whether something counts as history, or whether it counts as physics, or whether it counts as theology? We do. And what does that mean in effect? That means we get to say which parts of Genesis are reliable and which aren't. Okay, that means you can pick and choose. All you have to do is relabel something from theology to history or whatever, and you can now say it's this is why we talk about theistic evolution. There are no two theistic evolutionists who agree on anything. Father Paul Robinson's work is largely the repackaged work of a Novus Ordo priest called Father Stanley Jackie, who died a few years ago. He was writing in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And even he doesn't agree entirely with Father Stanley Jackie, and Father Stanley Jackie himself didn't agree with any of the other theistic evolutionists. So you have to pick one of them, and they each tell you that they have exactly the right answer, and it's always different. And in the end, if we're being asked to believe in evolution, but God did it, means what we're being asked to believe is that the single biggest event in creation was in fact the Big Bang, if you think about it. That's the most important event in God's creation. And yet it's mentioned nowhere in the Bible, nowhere does our Lord even refer to it, and not one of the fathers of the church, the apostles, the saints, the doctors, for hundreds of years mentions it. In fact, none of them believe in it. All of them are literal six-day creationists, every single one of them. So our Lord didn't mention this big important event called the Big Bang, and then the entire church fell instantly into error and believed and taught erroneously that Genesis was literally true. For 1,850 odd years, until God used as his instrument to reveal to the truth to humanity, he used Charles Darwin, Charles Lyell, Edwin Hubble. He used these guys to reveal his truth to humanity and enlighten them from the error that the Catholic Church had been teaching for 1,900 odd years. And he created the entire universe, solar system, stars, galaxy, you name it, for us, to show his glory, for our awe, for our edification. But then he created it all for us, but he only created us right at the end, 13, 14, 15 billion years, and for the last quarter of 1 million we start to exist. That doesn't make any sense. And in order to create mankind, he used macroevolution, which in effect means he used disease, illness, mutation, suffering, death as his instrument to create human beings. Because survival of the fittest, notice, is a dishonest euphemism. What does it really mean? It means the perishing of the weakest. That's what survival of the fittest means. It means the perishing of the weakest. So God used it. Notice it's backwards. Again, Kent Hogan makes a big deal out of this, and he's absolutely right to make a big deal out of it. We know that man brought death into the world. Suffering, disease, death, all of that is a result of original sin. God, in Genesis it says God made everything and he saw that it was good. It means it was perfect. There's a perfection to God, so there's a perfection to his creation. He saw that it was good, and we're the ones who damaged it by original sin. Man brought death into the world. It's in Handel's Messiah. Since by man came death. You know that movement? Very beautiful. Since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection from the dead. Man brought death into the world, but if you believe evolution, it's backwards. It's death that brought man into the world. Death brought man into the world. Completely inconsistent. And also, by the way, the order in which things were created is the wrong way around as well, because the birds, for instance, and the fish and the land animals, I think, according to evolution, the fish came first and then they grew legs and walked on the land. Well, it's the other way around. In Genesis, it's the land animals first and then the fish are created afterwards. The plants are created on day 3. The sun, moon, stars and planets are created on day 4. Well, plants can't live without the sun. So if each day was 1 million years or something, a plant can't survive 1 million years without the sun. It can survive 1 night without the sun. So it makes perfect sense if it's each day is an actual day. And as St. Thomas says, the reason that it's evening and morning the first day is because God is saying from now on time will be measured in days, setting the measure of time. There's 1,001 inconsistencies with it, and then what you end up believing in is something that none of our Catholic ancestors believed in, which makes God cruel and arbitrary and dishonest and the cause of human suffering, and his entire creation is arbitrary, and it doesn't make any sense. And there's no point in Revelation, because Revelation doesn't mention the most important points, which God, by the way, then used men like Charles Darwin. There's no way that you can marry the two together in the end. Richard Dawkins is wrong about a lot of things, but he's right about one thing, I think. In the end, you have to choose. If you're going to be completely consistent, in the end, you have to choose between one and the other. You can't have it. And it took me, to be quite honest with you, it took me the first 33 years of my life to realise that. If you'd asked me only a few years ago, I would have said, yeah, you can believe in I probably would tend to more towards creation, but you can believe in theistic evolution. I don't think that's true now. I don't think you can. I just don't see how you can believe in theistic evolution, progressive creation, or whatever. All of this stuff happened, but God did it.
What's progressive creation? Sorry.
Well, like I say, there's 1,001 variants, and none of them agree with each other. So it's a bit like, oh, God did it, but He did it over millions of years. There's so many variants of this. There's the day-age thing. Yeah. We could go into it, but I mean, what's the point in the end? It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. Right. What I thought we would do here is have a look at macroevolution. You'll notice, by the way, there were 100 slides in part 1. Did I mention religion once in it? No. And I think we have to not fall into that trap. With most people out there, they've been so marinated in this propaganda of science versus religion, faith versus science. You must break free of that false paradigm. It is not science versus religion. It's fake science versus real science. And evolution is fake science. It's not scientific. It's a religion. It's fake religion versus true religion, if you prefer to put it. Okay? So, and I think most people, the religion thing will suggest itself of its own accord. The real difficulty is not convincing them of religion. The real difficulty is breaking them free of the mental shackles of this fake science. Once people stop believing it, once they doubt what the media and these important fancy people, professors at various universities, are telling them, once you punch a hole in that and shake their faith in it, the rest will just naturally happen. It just follows on from there. Right, macroevolution. Let's go. So,
why is it not?
I don't know.
Sorry. What's happened?
These days.
Oh.
But yeah, going back to what you said before, I think the importance of this can't be overstated, because once you totally reject all the evolution stuff, it completely frees you from the pretentious scientist. You need to listen to me,
Yep.
and then in the next breath they're saying, "Oh, a clump of cells isn't a baby."
Yeah.
You know, these are the same people. That's what this is what we're like. What's at stake, isn't it?
And I think, I mean, there's an argument that we should be doing this to kind of normal people out there, but I mean, there's an argument that we should just be doing it with Catholics, because I think a lot of Catholics, if they don't understand it, they kind of want the Catholic faith to be true, they want to believe the Church, but at the back of their mind, they're just not 100% certain that maybe the Church hasn't got it wrong, and they're kind of tempted to hedge their bets a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Mentally, without realising it, they just, what if they are going to prove that the Bible is wrong? That, in fact, is the origin of modernism in the late 19th century. There's a very good little book called The Handbook of Heresies by M.L. Cousins that explains in detail how modernism, the modernism that St. Pius X condemned in the early 20th century, 1908, 1909, 1910. The reason that problem had come about over the last few decades was because Darwin, and there were Catholics, particularly on the continent, who were just trying to hedge their bets a little bit. Whereas in fact, if you give people the confidence, show them that it's all nonsense beyond any doubt, and then it will give them the confidence to really stand by the Catholic faith, I think. Right. So, macroevolution, there are, I think, I would say maybe 12, maybe at the most 15 so-called evidences of macroevolution. I've looked in a few different textbooks. You never normally come across more than 2 or 3. Every single one of them is totally fraudulent, and sometimes people mount a campaign of getting it taken out of the book, it's been proved wrong, and they'll just put another one in and they just rotate them around. But again, you see the same process where intramurally they'll admit this isn't true, but to the public they'll present it. Right, embryology supposedly proves evolution. This is a textbook by Miller and Levine from the year 2000, not all that long ago. Okay, where you have different stages of the development of an embryo, and supposedly what it shows is that we evolved from a fish, because the embryo earlier on, they all look like little fish, and they develop into distinct things. Total nonsense. Okay, but this is Jerry Coyne, quite a well-known evolutionist, in his book Why Evolution is True, in 2009, that was published very recently. All vertebrates begin development looking like embryonic fish, because we all descended from a fish-like ancestor. Okay? Another biology textbook, 2004, by Holt. Evolutionary history of organisms is also seen in the development of embryos. Now, this originally was started by a man called Ernst Haeckel in Germany in the 1860s. He was a big fan of Darwin, and he wanted to convert everybody in Germany to Darwinism. Next slide, please. So he came up with some drawings of embryos, and he took them around all the different universities and converted everybody to believing in Darwinism because it proved by embryology. Those are his drawings there, and the early development at the top. They all look the same, and it's only later on in the development of the embryo that you can see it looks. That's a human being, that's a pig, fish and salamander, and I don't know what else. One of these is a chicken, I think. Oh look, they started off the same, therefore it proves that we all evolved from each other at some point. Now, his own university accused him of fraud, the University of Jena, in I think 1874. So these drawings are totally fraudulent, and we've known that for at least the last, 140 years. But I just showed you on the previous slide, these are still doing the rounds as proof of evolution. Wikipedia. Recent analyses, 1998 2002, have found that some of the criticisms of Haeckel's embryo drawings were legitimate. Why do you have to do an analysis to see whether it's either those are true representations or they're not? But others were unfounded. So Wikipedia is trying to say, oh no, Haeckel wasn't really guilty. Well, he was. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. You'll notice, like calling it's a fancy word for something that's just silly. Most people don't have any real familiarity with Latin and Greek. Believe me, if you've been educated in the classics, you're not as easily impressed when it comes to fancy words, right? Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Ontogeny means being an embryo, and phylogeny means what phyla you're in. It recapitulates phylogeny, means you go through all the different types of animal that you evolved through when you're an embryo, is all that means. A bit like you'll notice with the coelacanth, the index fossil from 300 million years ago, and then it turns out that it's still alive today and swimming around in the African Ocean. It's a Lazarus taxon. Tasso is a Greek verb. It means to arrange. Sun tasso, I put together, is where we get the word syntax. Okay? So calling it a Lazarus taxon is just a fancy way of saying we thought it was dead and it's not. 300 million years ago. By the way, notice I forgot to mention in passing, with the coelacanth that's allegedly 300 million years old and still alive, why hasn't it evolved in the last 300 million years? Why is it still around? It's been there for 300 million years, but it hasn't changed. That doesn't seem right somehow. Anyway, on we go. Right, below is a photograph of the actual embryo. I quote, yet again, the great Kent Hovind, the one and only. Now, either he's a really bad artist, or he lied. That's what they actually look like. Those drawings are fraudulent. There's just no way around it. They're fraudulent drawings. But they are still doing the rounds today. They're still in certain, like I say, different editions of different textbooks will have different so-called proofs in there. They never have them all in. They usually pick 2 or 3. And of course, when you're a pupil in school and your teacher says, oh yes, and the book says it, well, it must be true if it's in the book. It's total nonsense. Right, there we go. Next slide, please. In 2000, the year 2000, Stephen Jay Gould, very famous professor, he's like the American equivalent of Richard Dawkins, really. I think he's at the University of, I forget where, one of the big famous ones, Harvard or MIT or something. Said that we should all be astonished and ashamed by the century of mindless recycling that has led to the persistence of these drawings, Haeckel's drawings, in a large number, if not the majority, of modern textbooks. How right he is, if they're still there. Right, next slide, please. This is a 2013 textbook that's taken from. Figure 2.2, embryos of different vertebrates at comparable stages of development. Those are Haeckel's drawings in a 2013 textbook. 9 years ago that was published. Still in use today. Right, second proof, homologous structures. I think this is the one you mentioned before, is that right?
I remember a goldfish. So
Oh,
I
okay.
can't remember.
Well, there
Oh,
we go.
the blood cells.
Oh, the blood cells.
Is that what I mentioned?
Oh, I thought you meant bones.
Yeah, I meant the blood cells.
So that's a human arm, and you have a radius and an ulna in the arm, and in a dog he has a radius and ulna in his leg, in his foot. Okay, it's true. We've got the same thing, haven't we? Yes. And a bird has a radius and an ulna in its wing, and a whale, and so on. An alligator in its forelimb has a radius and an ulna. By the way, who thought of those names? We did. But yeah, that proves that they have a common ancestor. Well, that's one interpretation. But it might prove that they have a common designer. Homology was later explained by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution in 1859, but had been observed before this. The fact that your theory explains something doesn't prove that it's true. That's a logical fallacy, which I think I mention on the next slide. If I don't, I'll mention it anyway. Yeah, similar structure equals similar design, therefore it's the same designer. Cars all have 4 wheels. Does that prove that they evolved from a roller skate? The lid of a Pringles tube fits on an empty goo pot. Does that prove they both evolved from a sherbet tube? Must do. They fit together perfectly. Right, next slide please. Yes, here we go. This is the fallacy of affirming the consequent. It's a very simple logical fallacy. It's where you say, if A, then B. B, therefore A. In other words, it's backwards logic. If it's raining, the grass will be wet. That's true, right? Okay. The grass is wet, therefore it must be raining. Well, hold on a moment. Suppose someone turned the sprinklers on. So maybe there were some kids having a water fight. If it's raining, then the grass will be wet, yes. That doesn't mean if the grass is wet, it must be raining. Okay? They do this all the time. If evolution is true, we would expect to find lots of fossils. Oh, look, we do find lots of fossils, therefore evolution must be true. But what if there's another explanation? What if there were a worldwide flood? Okay, mutations. They love this. That's the famous 4-winged fruit fly. I was taught that when I did GCSE biology at school. Look at these fruit flies. They have 4 wings. And superficially, it's very plausible because it looks like an improvement, doesn't it? It's got even more wings, so maybe it can fly even faster. The problem is, these wings aren't attached to anything. There's no muscle, so they're just dead weight. And it's missing, because of the mutation, these little vibrators next to the wing, which keeps it stable in flight. What they did is they took the embryos of the fruit flies. This has been done again and again and again over the last, 50 odd years, and they zap them and nuke them and microwave them and x-ray them, and they get all kinds of mutants. Some of the flies have curled wings, some of them have no wings. Kent Hovind called it a crawl. It can't fly. You get fruit flies with 4 wings. The one thing that they have in common, other than being mutations, is they are all harmful mutations. And there's basically, if you zap them and cause, well, there's 3 outcomes. Either no mutation at all, or a harmful mutation, or it dies. Never have they managed to come across a beneficial mutation. There's one textbook that Kent Hovind uses, and he quotes from, where it says to the pupils, this is a harmful mutation, good mutations are how evolution happens. Well, okay, show us a good mutation then. There are no good mutations. There are no good mutations. Never beneficial, they are always harmful. Okay? By the way, on the issue of the flies, you'll notice the extra wings are fly wings. In other words, the genetic information for that wing already exists. A cow with 5 legs. That 5th leg is always a cow leg. The information for it is already there, but you've just scrambled already existing information. There's no new genetic information. There's no new programming code. It's a line of code that's been put in the wrong place. It's taking what's already there and scrambling it. Okay? And is it an advantage to have 5 legs? No, it isn't. You're going to die earlier, and you're not going to be able to walk very easily. Okay? This happens all the time. North Wales Live. Jake, the five-legged lamb, will be adopted as a family mascot. Oh, isn't he cute? Is he? Or is he a monster? I think he's a monster. By the way, when the wolf gets into the field, guess who's getting eaten first because he can't run as fast as the others? How is that an evolutionary advantage? Yeah. Explore Evolution, textbook page 101 says, these experiments show that mutations can induce dramatic changes in the anatomical structure of organisms, and for many evolutionary biologists, they provide a powerful confirmation of the neo-Darwinian claim that mutations provide the novel variations that natural selection needs to build new anatomical architectures and animals. What a fancy, pretentious, pompous, overblown way of saying this is how evolution happens. But it doesn't. It's always harmful, and there's never any new information. Notice, by the way, that that fifth leg is a lamb's leg. Okay, you never get a mutation where, you know, you'll get a cow with 5 legs, but you'll never get a cow with wings, right? You'll never get a cow with a human brain. You never get new information. It's always taking something existing and scrambling it, putting it in the wrong place. How honest are the textbooks? The effects of mutations vary widely. Some have little or no effect, and some produce beneficial variations. No, they don't. Give me one example of a beneficial variation. Now, the only thing they will ever cite is something on a level of microbes, bacteria, and so on. Never with animals, never with actual structures. They talk about beneficial variations. This Miller and Levine, I already mentioned them earlier on. It's a school textbook. Mutations are often thought of as negative because they disrupt the normal function of genes. However, without mutations, organisms cannot evolve. Notice the word however should be struck out there. That's right. Without mutations, they okay, well then maybe evolution doesn't happen. Okay. This is from 2017. I'm putting this on here to show you this is still being taught today. Doesn't matter how many times it's proved nonsense, they still persist in teaching it. 2017. Fruit fly mutation foretells 40 million years of evolution. That's the focus of a new study by a Florida State University researcher who raised 200 generations of fruit flies to examine how they changed. I think the real reason that he did it is because if you were paid to raise fruit flies through your grant, I think he needs to get a real job, to be quite honest. There we go. Right, next slide please. So, this is from a 1996 textbook. Normal fruit flies have 2 wings, this mutant has 4. This rare mutation, like most mutations, is harmful. Beneficial mutations are the raw material for natural selection. So this one is harmful. The good ones is how it works, but they don't show you an example of good. Why are you showing us an example of a bad mutation and then telling everybody the good ones is what makes it happen? Beneficial mutations would need to involve structures, not just genes. Yeah, Jonathan Wells, Icons of Evolution, that's worth watching. There's a couple of YouTube videos. Icons of Evolution is a book he published in the year 2000. He's quite a well-known, he was quite a high-up scientist. I think he was professor at the University of Berkeley, California, and then he stopped believing in evolution because it was just too much evidence. And yeah, he now says, I'm ashamed to think of what I used to teach. He published his book, Icons of Evolution, in the year 2000, and it actually did quite well. Obviously, he lost his job and his career and everything, that goes without saying. He published an updated version more recently, but you can find YouTube videos of him talking about this. Very, very interesting chap. Anyway. Alright, so number 4, they sometimes try and give you this, although less so now, but you sometimes see this is proof of evolution. We tend to refer to it as the missing link. They no longer do because they don't like it. They'll tell you off and they'll say, oh no, we mustn't say missing link. You have to say it's our common ancestor. Or they'll just talk about, well, our common ancestor. Media love that term, but that really means the missing link. Darwin, in his original book on the origin of species, says it is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout time and space should be related to each other. All animals and plants are related to each other, says Darwin. And then he says later on in the same book, If my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties linking most closely all the species of the same group together must assuredly have existed, but we don't find any of them. The other thing I want you to note as we go through this is the absolute desperation that these guys have to try and find something. They're so desperate. Why? Next slide, please. Right, this is Java Man. This is one of their first attempts. It's a portion of a skull, a single tooth, and a thigh bone, based on which they reconstructed this whole thing. But you can guarantee that's what people see in the museum. Scientists have determined this is what he looked like. And very few people will go, oh, hold on, how can you possibly know that? Yeah, and then it was, not long after that they ditched it because they found a better one. That is what they always do. Even when it's proved nonsense, they'll then hold on to it doggedly until something better comes along. So the very famous Piltdown Man, that man is infamous on the right. That's a Jesuit priest called Father Tayada Chardin, who was a leading modernist 100, 120, 130 years ago. And where did his modernism come from? It was the fact that he fell for evolution and he believed it and he threw himself behind it wholeheartedly. And he was one of the main proponents. He fell for this. The Piltdown Man was a deliberate hoax where the chap took a human skull and an ape's jaw and put them together and buried them and then discovered them. And it was, of course, an intermediate ancestor. This was in 1908. And they discovered it was a hoax not long after that. It wasn't until 1953 that they admitted that they had known for quite some time that it had been fooling everybody. So why did they not admit it for so long? Again, because they can't allow. This is one of the things I hold against these guys, is they're not honest. They won't admit, yeah, we got that wrong. They won't admit, oh, we don't actually know that. They have to, part of the propaganda effort of the general public is they need to present a united front of we have the answer to everything. So they can't admit any holes in that. Right, next slide. Nebraska Man is possibly the most ridiculous because it was a single tooth from a pig, based on which the artist's reconstruction is on the right. Okay, they worked out based on a tooth that he looked like that. Yeah, next slide please. Ramapithecus, for a time in the 60s and 70s, it says the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is about the same as Wikipedia to be honest. Ramapithecus was thought to be a distinct genus that was the direct ancestor of modern humans, and it turned out to be an orangutan. Okay. And then I think that takes us to the latest one, next slide please, which is, there we go, Lucy, discovered in 1974 in Africa, at Hadar, a site at the Awash Valley in the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia by paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. He's an American. What they're not telling you is he'd been out there for a year or two. He discovered Lucy about 2 weeks before his grant money ran out. And instantly, oh yes, that's our ancient ancestor. It's been dated to be 3.2 million years old. Well, I showed you the KBS Tough earlier on, where they said the ground was, what was it, 200 million years old, and then they found a human skull under it. I have to explain their way out of that one. Lucy, the problem with Lucy, and again, they don't tell you this in Wikipedia, notice that's what's in the museum. Can you see its different colours? Right, the brown bits are actually what they found. The white bits are plastic where they're filling in the gaps. It's 40% of a skeleton. 60% is missing. How do they fill it in? They fill in the missing 60%, the majority of it, the way they want it to be. That's what you see in the museum. Next slide. Right, that's what they actually found. Okay? Now you'll notice, if you look at this remains of a skeleton, look at the bits that are missing. Are there any important things that are missing from that skeleton? Particularly when you're talking about a monkey turning into a human. What might be important that we might need to know that's actually missing from that skeleton? There's no hands, there's no feet, there's very little of the legs, so the leg to arm ratio is a matter of just imagination, given that this is a filling in the gap game. Okay, so the whole whether it walks upright or not thing, you can't tell from that. Most of the skull is missing. But based on 40%, with all the important bits being in the missing 60%, they say, oh yes, it's half ape and half human, and it's our ancient ancestor. And then that's their evidence. Right, next slide. There we go. This is from a creationist Protestant website, but I think they did a pretty good job there. Okay? Short or long arms, you can't tell because of the ratio, because so much is missing. And short or long legs, it works both ways. So they're asking us to believe that this was an upright walking, kind of hairy but kind of not hairy, monkey man, half human, half monkey thing. And they have a museum thing, showing what it really looked like and so on. But in fact, it's probably just an orangutan. It's probably just a normal monkey. So they found 40% of a normal monkey skeleton, and then they've constructed the rest of it using their imagination. Again, most people will believe it because scientists say, and that's the modern magisterium, isn't it? So, it's like, there we go, spot the difference. They've gone from that to that. This is a museum exhibit there, I forget which museum it's from, but notice the kind of patchy body hair, hairier than a normal human being, but not as hairy as a monkey. Look at the thoughtful expression. It's such nonsense. How can you possibly tell how much hair there was based on only the bones? How can you tell that it had a thoughtful expression? You can't. That's all pure imagination. Okay. The peppered moth. In the A-level biology textbooks of a certain school, which some of you might know, some of you might even look into, this is in the textbook. It's a favourite of theirs. I've seen it in a lot of different textbooks. I was taught this at school for GCSE biology. Who's familiar with the story of the peppered moth? You did it as well? Right. Could one of you explain it so that I don't have to? I mean, I can, but I'm just...
The Darwin brothers discredited that like at least 20 years ago.
Oh, it's been discredited, yeah. Yeah. It's been discredited for a long time. What's the official story then behind the peppered moth?
I can't remember.
Okay, the story is this. The chap was a professor, not a professor, but he was an academic from the University of Oxford. He went up to Manchester or somewhere up in the northwest there. Okay, he looked at the trees, and he said, well, they're silver birch trees, so they're white, but because of all the industrial soot, the trees had turned black. And there's two varieties of moth. There's a light variety and a dark variety. Okay. And it used to be that the light variety were the more common because the dark ones, when they landed on a silver birch tree trunk, the black moth is more easily visible, so the birds can eat it. And the light variety is better camouflaged. But then when the soot turned the tree trunks dark, it was the white ones that stood out, and so the white population began to get eaten and the dark population thrived. Yes? Does everybody follow that so far? Now that story on the face of it, were it true, all that proves is variation within a kind, so-called microevolution. You've got moths of two colours, okay? And maybe they had a common ancestor which was a moth. Okay, that doesn't show you anything at all. That's like human beings with light skin and dark skin. They're still human beings. It doesn't prove that they evolved from an amoeba which turned into a fish which crawled out and grew legs, right? It doesn't show anything except a variation within the same gene pool. That's all that shows. However, next slide. The truth is more interesting. Bernard Kettlewell is the name of the man, and he conducted this experiment in 1958, and he claims a 5%, 95% ratio. So by the time the trees had turned black with soot, it was only 5% white moths and 95% of them were dark because they were better camouflaged. Okay? Complete lie. The whole thing was fabricated. I think he got them out of cold storage and they were still lethargic and sluggish, so he had to warm them up on the bonnet of his car. And then he actually had to glue them to the tree trunk to take that picture. The picture in the textbook is a fraudulent picture. It's a picture of moths glued to the... And it's only when I discovered this I thought, actually, hold on a minute. When have you ever seen a moth? They're nocturnal. They only come out at night. If it's night time and you have the light on and the window open, the moths will fly in, right? Has anybody here actually seen a moth in the daylight? I don't think I ever have. They're nocturnal creatures. So how can you have a picture of a tree trunk with just random moths sitting on it in broad daylight? That never happens. He glued them to the tree, took the photo, and he used a grand total of 2 moths, by the way. So how do you get 95% and 5% of 2 moths? It's just lies from start to finish. This is yeah, there we go. No one's ever been able to successfully repeat the experiment, which is usually a bad sign. That means it's not really scientific. Peppered moths in the wild don't rest on tree trunks. They live at the top of trees under the leaves, obviously, because then the birds can't eat them. They're not stupid. They're nocturnal. They don't come out during the day. Only 2 moths were used. So how did he get 95%? And he glued them to the tree trunk and took the picture. I'm not even sure that they're alive. I think they were dead and he glued them onto the tree trunk. And they're still in the textbooks today. It's been known at least for the last 40 years. Look, this is completely fraudulent. Some of these so-called proofs have only been disproven, but there are 1 or 2 of them that which were fraudulent from the very beginning, and this is one that's absolutely fraudulent, and they know it. Right, the evolution of the horse. This is also in the textbooks used at a certain school that I could mention in the A-level biology textbook. It says Eohippus, but until recently it said Hyracanthium, Hyraconium. I'll come back to it in a minute. The reason that they've changed it to Eohippus is because the origin, the ancestor of the modern horse, it turned out is still alive. It's called a hyrax. It's a meat-eating animal. It's about the size of a badger or a fox, and it's still alive today. And the chap who came up with the evolution of the horse didn't find all these different bones of different animals together. He didn't find them in the same place. He didn't find them at the same time. They come from different parts of the world at different times, and he simply arranged them in order of size and said, I think that that's how it evolved. Well, I mean, that's not scientific either. That's like putting a spoon and a fork and then putting a spork in between and saying, look, the spoon evolved from the fork, right? You can arrange them in a certain order. It doesn't prove anything. Next slide, please. So there we go, yes. Othniel Seamarsh in 1874 did this. He arranged them in order which he imagined them to have evolved. Modern horses are found in layers together with and even below the supposed ancestor of the horse. Now, footnote, those layers don't mean a thing, remember. That geological column is all nonsense. But they believe in it. So by their logic, that can't be true. Because you've got the ancestor of the horse and below it you've got the actual modern day horse. So that alone, in their eyes, should disprove it. Yeah, Hyracotherium is the ancestor, well they now call it Eohippus. Yeah, Mesohippus. Hippos in Greek means a horse, and meso means middle. These are all fancy names, they're just, very often they're very mundane, they just mean middle horse. Yeah, so Equus, well that just means horse. Okay, next slide. There we go, this is one. There's all sorts of inconsistencies. The number of ribs. The ancient ancestor of the horse, allegedly, had 18 pairs of ribs. Then it goes down to 15 pairs of ribs. Then 19 pairs of ribs. Then back down to 18 pairs of ribs. So when it was evolving, it couldn't make up its mind how many pairs of ribs it needed. And then you get to the modern horse. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Next slide, please. But it's in the textbooks. I was going to, if I had a bit of time free during the school day, just go and photograph it. I didn't get a chance, but it is there. That people learn that for A-level biology today. G.G. Simpson of Harvard in Life of the Past 1953, just to show you how long people have known that this isn't true, he says, the uniform continuous transformation of Hyracotherium into Equus, so dear to the hearts of generations of textbook writers, never happened in nature. Wadsworth's University and Diversity of Life, 1992. Other examples, including the much-repeated gradual evolution of the modern horse, have not held up under close examination. You see the same thing. These scientists will admit intramurally among each other, yeah, this is nonsense and we know it. But when it comes to writing a textbook for children in schools, that's fine, we'll still present it to them, because we've got to have some kind of evidence for evolution. Every single piece of so-called macroevolution evidence is wrong and can be easily disproved. And like I say, they normally choose 2 or 3 and they just rotate them around. Alright, next slide please. Vestigial organs. I was taught this. The appendix, you don't need it anymore. The coccyx, tailbone. Oh, it's because we used to have a tail and then we lost it because we didn't need it. Kent Hovind says, imagine driving your car and being able to drive the car and drink a Coke and change the radio dial at the same time. Right, the tail would be quite useful. It's a joke, but it kind of has a serious point to it. Or arriving at the door with 2 bags of groceries and not being able to open it. That's the appendix. I was taught in school, not all that long ago, that the appendix has no useful function. And it turns out it does, but there we go. So this is the University of Berkeley website today, says this. All life bears the scars of its history, including humans. Our awkward wisdom teeth and appendix are simply historical holdovers that evolution has not managed to rid us of. It turns out that's totally untrue. Next slide. The human appendix may be considered as a vestigial organ, as it has been proved that the removal of the organ after infancy does not create any harm. Notice the logical fallacy. You can have it removed and still live, therefore it's no use to you. Well, you can live without both your eyes, you can live without both your ears, you can live without all of your teeth. Does that mean that teeth are no use to you? You can live without both your arms and both your legs. The fact that something is not essential doesn't mean it serves no purpose. Next slide. Right. Wikipedia, astonishingly, and this amazed me, they actually admit that this has been proved wrong. The appendix was once considered a vestigial organ, but this view has changed since the early 2000s. Research suggests that appendix may have served an important purpose. In particular, it may serve as a reservoir for beneficial gut bacteria. There's a few other things. It produces killer T cells or killer B cells, I think, or both, which are part of your immune system. They help you fight disease. If you have your appendix removed, you are more likely to fall ill with a certain number of different illnesses. Yeah, next slide please. Okay, Encyclopedia Britannica can't make their minds up, so they say here, the appendix, formerly vermiform appendix, by the way, again, fancy Latin word, vermiform literally means it looks like a worm. That's what that means. Is a vestigial hollow tube. It's not clear whether it serves any useful purpose in humans, but then they go on and spend ages talking about all the useful purposes that it probably serves. And then they conclude with, there is general agreement among scientists that the appendix is gradually disappearing from the human species over evolutionary time. Makes no sense. So it's a useless vestigial organ, serves no clear purpose, except we think that it probably serves this purpose and that purpose and that purpose. But other than that, it's a vestigial organ and we're losing it over time. Okay. Next slide, there we go. This is Time magazine, their website. Your appendix may not be useless after all. That's from 2017, 5 years ago. Next slide. Scientific American, that's no vestigial organ, that's my appendix. A study in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology finds that many more animals have appendixes than was thought, and that the appendix is not merely a remnant of digestive organ called the pigment, all of which means that the appendix might not be so useless. That's 2009. Next slide. Right. In fact, we've known for a long time. In 1900, Richard Berry reported that it was an important part of the immune system. Therefore, it's not vestigial. By the way, he's not a good guy. He's an evolutionary scientist in the days when straight-up Darwinist racialism was highly respectable, and I think he got a post in. He did all sorts of horrible things. He stole dead bodies to do experiments on. He got a post in Australia, and then he basically treated the Aboriginals as though they were animals and not really human beings, and did all sorts of horrible things to them as well. Not a nice guy, anyway. This is a recent article, 2018. Like wisdom teeth or the appendix, a vestigial tail is believed to be a leftover of human evolution, says Valencia Higuera. Well, I'm sorry, Valencia Higuera, but that's not true. Next slide. The coccyx or tailbone. This is a museum exhibit from the American Museum of Natural History. The coccyx serves no purpose. It reminds us that humans have descended from ancestral animals with tails. Next slide. So that's it there, it's at the end of the spine. There are lots of important muscles that attach to it, some of which are to do with reproduction, some of them in fact are to do with, you know, being able to hold it in and go to the toilet when you're able to, bladder muscles, that kind of thing. So it does serve. Also, it helps with your posture. Next slide. Okay. The Miller-Urey experiment is more to do with organic evolution and how life came about. I'm not going to explain this. The reason I put the YouTube link in there is because I'm going to let Jonathan Wells, the man I mentioned earlier who wrote this Icons of Evolution, in about 4 minutes of video where he explains it. Essentially, the guy tried to simulate in the laboratory how life came about and create amino acids from gases and so on. There's a circuit here where it goes round, the gases go round, he zaps them with a spark, and then he draws it off here, and then he sends the gases round again. Right, should we open the YouTube link? Is that
Just,
there's about 6 or 7 ways that this experiment doesn't work. Serious problems with it.
you just put the Wi-Fi on, so
Oh, is it not on? While we're waiting, I'll tell you. First of all, the gases are the wrong gases. So he has ammonia, 1 or 2 other bits in there. He doesn't have oxygen because whatever is created as a result would oxidize. So he has to leave oxygen out of it in order for it to work. But that means you can't have ozone, and ozone keeps out UV light, and UV light destroys ammonia, which is one of his gases. So you can't have life being created with oxygen, and you can't have it being created without oxygen. By the way, even if this experiment did work, it would prove that it took intelligence, 2 intelligent scientists in a lab in order to make it. He has to draw it off because if he sent the resultant product around a second time, the second spark would destroy what had been created. So that's cheating. If it happened in the ocean in a prebiotic soup, you'd have Brownian motion, which means you wouldn't get that they'd be bouncing away from each other all the time. So that wouldn't work. Anyway, yeah, there's a number of things where they had to cheat like mad in order to get this to work. What else? The product was only 2% amino acid. Most of it, about 88%, was tar, 10% carboxylic acid, totally toxic in other words. And even the amino acids weren't the right sort, and half of them were left-handed and half of them were right-handed, which won't work either for forming protein. So, yeah.
being retarded.
Oh, I've had the same
Click the
problem
link
with these
over.
before. Sometimes it just doesn't play videos. It might be the HDMI cable setting.
Oh, I'll try copy and pasting it, sorry.
Yeah, I've been trolled like this before. It's the same thing why the screen isn't the same on the laptop or something.
Let's try copying the link.
Do we have speakers? You will just have to turn the sound up on.
Yeah. Alright, it has opened, it's just not
How are we doing for time, by the way? Scott,
okay.
you've got a lot of tabs open.
Yeah, I was spam clicking it.
You're trying to convince MI5 that you're really annoying.
Oh, come on. What?
That's a strange title for a video.
Is this the right video?
It's a video
Is that a work laptop?
It's not currently available on this device.
Right,
If it's a work laptop, that's probably why.
do you just want to try, do you know what the video would be called? So if we...
Oh gosh, no, because I've queued it up to the right time. Can you just make it full
In
screen?
1953, Stanley Miller, in the lab of Harold Urey, simulated what scientists then thought was the early Earth's atmosphere. This was an honest experiment. Miller was not out to trick anybody. The atmosphere he used contained methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor, and he used an electric spark to simulate lightning. So there's the spark. The water would boil here, the gases enter here, the spark, and then the results would accumulate down here. And after a week, Miller analyzed this brown tar and found some amino acids, which are the chemical building blocks of proteins. And this was widely touted as a step in explaining the first step in the origin of life. This showed how the building blocks of life formed on the early Earth. That's the way it was advertised. By 1980, however, geochemists had concluded from many kinds of evidence that the Earth's early atmosphere consisted of gases emitted from volcanoes, and that any hydrogen that might have been there, being the lightest element, would have escaped the Earth's gravity into space. So here we have a comparison of the Miller-Urey gases, water vapor, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. Lots of hydrogen here, including lots of free hydrogen. And the volcanic gases, water vapor, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, a lot of oxygen here, and a few other trace gases as well. Well, in 1983, Miller himself, with a colleague, tried using a carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide atmosphere to produce amino acids. And they found that the glycine, which is the simplest amino acid of the 20-some amino acids our bodies contain, glycine is almost the only amino acid produced from carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide atmospheres. And then, only if they added excess hydrogen. Well, remember, that was the first thing to disappear in the early Earth, according to geochemists. So they had to add excess hydrogen just to make this work. And if they wanted anything more complex, they had to add methane as well. So by 1999, it was clear that the experiment didn't work. This is Freeman Dyson. Miller's experiment was supposed to be a true simulation of prebiotic, that is, pre-life chemistry on the primitive Earth. But now nobody believes this anymore, except the biology textbooks, which all used to persuade students that life had a materialistic origin. So they were still being used in 2000. Now it's 2017, and it's still there. Here are three widely used textbooks: Kenneth Miller and Joseph Levine, Scott Freeman's Biological Science, Mater's Biology. All of them use the Miller-Urey experiment to convince students that scientists have explained the first step in the materialistic origin of life.
No good?
Yeah, that's it. All right, let's go back to the thing. There is another bit of video in a moment that I want to show everybody, so we may have to do that again. All right, so I mean that's not macroevolution strictly speaking, that's more organic evolution, but that is in a lot of the textbooks as you've seen there, and it's a big problem. It doesn't work. They're not telling you that. Anyway, okay, let's go on. Yeah, like I say, mostly tar, 10% carboxylic acid, and only 2% amino acids. No oxygen was allowed into the mix, but that's that's part of the atmosphere, right? It's oxygen. You can't keep oxygen out of it. That's cheating. The mixture had to be drawn off, so that when the gases went round again and got hit by another spark, it wouldn't destroy what had been created. So that's cheating. The amino acids that were created, those 2%, were left-handed and right-handed, which means they won't fold into a protein. There's no Brownian motion. Oh yeah, and a spark. Okay, so what's that simulating? Presumably the ocean, but then really you're saying that lightning actually hit that exact spot. I mean, what are the odds? Okay, well, so, and then every time they try and repeat it, there's even more things wrong with it that mean that it doesn't work. Okay. Next slide. So there we go. Right. On the point of amino acids and proteins, then this is just too good not to watch it. Now this guy is Stephen C. Meyer, very famous. Unfortunately, he's a theistic evolutionist, long age, blah blah blah. Long age, but God did it. So I can't recommend him. but on certain issues, he's very good. And this is one of them. We've noted that. It's the whole video, which is about 7 minutes long. It's worth watching the whole thing. So the point is, even if you could get an amino acid, what would it take to turn that into a protein completely by chance? Okay.
Before using the uplearner, I will stop on C's and all.
The building blocks of the proteins, right? At each one of these sites, how many possible amino acids could be part of a growing protein? You know this from the biology, that there are 20 possible protein-forming amino acids, okay? So you've got a 1 in 20 chance at each site. So to get at 2 sites, how many possible combinations do you have? 20 times 20 again, so 400. If then you go to 3 sites, how many possible combinations? 20 times 20, 400 times 20 again, 8,000. Very good and quick. Okay. Now 8,000 times 20 again, 160,000, and we're only to 4. Okay. So there's a vast number of possibilities. You've got a 1 in 20 times 1 in 20 times 1 in 20 times 1 in 20, going out however many sites you have for amino acids. So in a chain of amino acids that's just 10 sites long, you're already to 20 to the 10 possible combinations. That's 10 trillion possibilities. But most proteins, even modestly, shortest proteins, are 100 to 150 amino acids. The average length proteins may be 300 to 400 amino acids. Can you see what's going to happen to these exponential numbers as far as the number of possible ways of combining the amino acids? Let's take a protein of 150 amino acids in length. That's a very modest, not real big one, okay? So we'll do that same calculation. We've got 150 sites with 20 possibilities at each site, 20 to the what power? 150th power. Convert that to base 10, that's 10 to the 195th power. We can't even begin to grasp how many combinations that is. Do you know there's only 10 to the 80th elementary particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, in the whole observable universe? You're getting some idea of the scope of these numbers. Now, we know that not every single amino acid combination is functional, but we also know that many of them are. So there's a big question if you're just kind of trying to assess how likely is it that we'd find a protein by chance with all the amino acids in that prebiotic soup interacting with each other for, say, billions of years. And I give it a lot of time. How likely is it that we'd ever get a protein to arise by chance? Well, imagine you're looking for red marbles in a jar of blue marbles. Well, to know the odds of finding a red marble, you want to know something about the ratio. Is it 1 out of 1,000, or is it 500 out of 1,000? Makes a difference, doesn't it? So I have a colleague who's been interested in the whole question of whether or not life could arise by chance for a long time. His name is Doug Axe. He's a molecular biologist. He did his PhD at Caltech. He worked for 14 years at Cambridge University, and he wanted to find out how common or how rare are the functional sequences of amino acids among the big space of all the possible amino acids there are. And he chose to work on a protein of about 150 amino acids to start to get an answer to this question. Now, what he did is he found that there were indeed many combinations that produced functional proteins. But he also found out that the ratio was very, very small. Essentially what he was asking was this: for every protein that forms a function, how many combinations of amino acids are there? You kind of get the idea? He's trying to get that marbles to marbles ratio. Now this is like the red marbles we want and the blue ones that we don't, okay? And he came up with a really amazing number. And it's 10 to the 74 power. Now that seems a little less scary because we just looked at this great big number, but this is still an enormously small probability. In other words, if you think of all the amino acids that there could be as a big haystack, and you start searching around for the functional ones, the ratio of functional ones to non-functional ones is like 1 to 10 to the 74. That's the ratio. So finding a functional protein by chance, just on this calculation, you can see is going to be easy or hard? Pretty hard. And we're going to start putting up some numbers on the board. So just to get the amino acid sequence properly, you've got odds of about 1 in 10 to the 74. But there's other probabilistic hurdles that have to be overcome. You want to build a protein, we know from chemistry that you have to attach the amino acids together with what's called a peptide bond. In nature, peptide bonds occur with about a 1 in 2, 1 in 2 frequency. Half the bonds that form between amino acids are peptide bonds, half aren't. But if you get any bonds forming that aren't peptide bonds, you can't form a protein. So to form a protein, 150 amino acids long, you've got a 1 in 2 chance at each site of getting the correct type of linkage. So you got 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 times 1 in 2 to the what power? Close to the 150. Since we got linkages, we have 149, but call it 150. Okay. So in other words, we got another huge exponential problem to overcome. So, and it turns out that 1 in 2 to the 150 is the same number as 10 to the 45th, 1 in 10 to the 45. So now we got two incredibly improbable things that we've got to overcome to build a functional protein by chance alone. One more problem. When you're building proteins, amino acids come in 2 flavors. There's a left-handed flavor and a right-handed flavor. They're called optical isomers, not flavors, okay? And the left-handed version is the only kind that can be used in building proteins. You get even one right-handed amino acid in there, and your protein won't fold properly. So you got another probabilistic hurdle to overcome. So you've got a 1 in 2 chance at each side again, out to the 150th power. 2 to the 150th power, again, is 10 to the 45. Oh my goodness. So the odds of building even a short functional protein by chance alone is 74 plus 9. You can remember how you do this in math. You can add the exponents if you're multiplying exponential numbers. Thank you very much. Okay? Wow. Now, can anyone get their mind around a number that big? There's only 10 to the 80th elementary particles in the entire universe. There's only 10 to the 16th seconds since the Big Bang. There's only 10 to the 139th total events since the beginning of the universe. Now you're starting to get the understanding of why people are very skeptical that the chance hypothesis is going to do the job. Now, you may have heard just the opposite. Has anyone ever gotten in a discussion with you about the origin of life and said, hey, it happened by chance? I mean, do you hear that? I mean, this happens to me. I'll be lecturing in hostile university environments, and I'll get done and somebody say, well, but, and they want to argue with me about the probabilities. And I just shut the discussion down because I say, no serious scientist thinks this is the way it happened. It's always going to be more probable that it didn't happen by chance than it did. And with that kind of reasoning, you realize it's time to move on and look at some other options. This is a real simplistic illustration, but
out of snacks. Get Doritos in minutes.
You notice, yeah, he believes in the Big Bang and all that. But even just that one issue, I think is explained fairly well. Amino acid, turning it into a protein, the probability is just ridiculous. The other thing about the Miller-Urey experiment is they say it created amino acids. They say this is the building blocks of life. Yeah, that's the raw material. Yes. The important point about DNA is it is code. It's information, which is also interesting because what is information? Information presupposes intelligence, or it's not information. If you're an astronomer looking out into deep space and you've got a radio signal and it turned out there was a pattern in it and you managed to decode it and it actually meant something, you'd conclude that there was intelligent life out there. Because you'd say, well, it wouldn't be information unless there was an intelligence that put that information into the pattern, right? Well, it's the same thing with DNA, but instead of the end of a telescope, it's at the end of a microscope, and we say, oh no, it happened by chance. Even if you could get amino acids to form, and enough amino acids to form into proteins and overcome Stephen C. Meyer's 1 in 10 to the power of 164 probability, you have the raw material. That's the equivalent of saying that's how you get ink and paper. A book is made of ink and paper, but ink and paper alone don't make a book. It has to be, the ink has to be arranged on the page in a certain way that it actually means something. That's the other problem. All right, next slide. Oh,
That's it.
is that it?
Yeah.
Great Scott. Well, there we are. I think that's how far I got before I ran out of time. Yeah. So there are other evidences of evolution. There's other stuff in the textbooks we could talk about, but I think that's enough to be going on. So part one then, I think there's no doubt at all that the Earth is not old; it's young. Okay, it's a few thousand years. Macroevolution can't happen. I mean, it can't happen for philosophical reasons in any case. Things can't create themselves any more than a woman can give birth to herself. There has to be a distinction between creator and creature, or it doesn't make any sense, does it? I think having not addressed the issue of religion apart from just briefly there, I think that probably is the thing that needs rounding off, is to just think through the implications, because what's really being proposed to us is a materialist worldview, and that's why they're so fond of evolution, because it really is the kernel of atheism, communism, materialism, you name it. That's what it's for, that's why it matters so much. And schools and universities are basically brainwashing factories for taking children of well-meaning parents very often and brainwashing them into materialism, brainwashing them into atheism. I mentioned before David Cameron passed this law in 2014 outlawing the teaching of creation in schools. Why? What are they afraid of? It's so obviously wrong, and creationism is so obviously crazy, and they should have no problem. But in fact, you'd think they would want to publish creationist arguments to just ridicule them. But they don't. Nobody is ever allowed to hear a credible defence of creation or a credible critique of evolution. And I'm convinced if most people could actually see what the arguments are and what the evidence is, there are very, very few people out there who would believe in evolution, in the evolutionary mindset. Really only the most hardened atheists, and there's a lot of people who pointed out, Kent Hogan says this all the time and he's right, other people point it out as well, there are people out there who believe evolution, who believe the Big Bang and the chance hypothesis and all the rest of it, because they don't want there to be a God. Because if there is a God who made everything, then he made the rules and he gets to say what the rules are, and you kind of have to obey him, and you owe him the fact that you even exist to begin with. And they don't want there to be a God, therefore they cling to evolution.